A few days ago, I watched Wicked Wizard's video about the dead infinite IKEA game concept, and it really got me thinking about sandbox survival games in general. I've tried a few over the years, but by and large, they can't really seem to keep my attention for more than a week. But why is that? There are plenty of survival games that I've played on and off for years, and some I consider to be some of my favorite games of all time. But then there's a laundry list of games that I've tried and got bored of really quickly, as well as games that I haven't tried and likely never will. After Minecraft exploded in popularity in the early 2010s, everyone wanted a slice of that cake. Games like 7 Days to Die, Rust, Stranded Deep, Astroneer, and Subnautica popped up all over the place, mostly on Steam Early Access. Around the same time, survival conversion mods for games like Fallout's New Vegas and 4 began popping up on places like Nexus. Some of these I've tried, some of these I have no desire to touch, and some of them have been sitting in my Steam wishlist for 10 years because teenage me thought they would be cool, and I am far too lazy to remove them now that I no longer have any interest. And then some of them I love and are loved by many. Unfortunately, what I find is that more often than not, I'll try a hardcore survival game or mod and then get bored incredibly quickly. This is probably a me problem, something about lack of creativity, lack of roleplay, something like that. But watching this video about the infinite IKEA SCP concept solidified something I'd been thinking about for a while. The way that I see it, these survival sandbox horror concepts that Wicked Wizard talks about in here are never going to see a 1.0 release for a multitude of factors. If by some miracle they do, I don't think they're going to last in any sort of public consciousness, even in niche communities. The problems begin with the typical story. Small team or a lone developer on their first project taking on a monumental task that would be difficult for even a large team with funding, resources, assets, people, experience, everything. And for what it's worth, these projects are incredibly impressive for what they are and more than I've ever accomplished in game dev, so props to them for at least trying to make something. But it's the same tragedy every time. Small dev gets way in over their head developing something that is way outside their skill, funding, scope level, and also managed to gain enough traction on the internet that people were willing to pay up front for the promise of a delivered product. Then the development hell begins, and ultimately the product never releases, or a subpar version releases, much to the dismay of backers. Or the third option, which I think might actually be the worst, is the infinite early access period, where you still get the development hell, but the players get to actively see the game get worse due to scope creep. The second problem that ties into the first is expectations. With modern technology, people generally expect the moon as far as graphics, interactions, characters, and gameplay go. Lone Survivor really intrigued me with the furniture movement for base building and breadcrumbs, simulating what would be done in real life. If I was trapped in an infinite IKEA, even before I realized that there were evil monsters trying to kill me, I'm building a fucking fort, all right? I'm building a fort. The problem is that this gameplay loop of scavenge, build, survive will only take you so far. Minecraft works because the entire game from conception has been primarily about creativity. The gameplay loop is in the name, mine, then craft.
Let's Minecraft!
And then you take your crafted materials and make whatever the hell you want. Over the 15 odd years Minecraft has existed, people have made genuinely awe-inspiring things. Things like cities that look real from a distance, ultra-efficient item farms, calculators and computers, shit, even a Beyond Borders library world for knowledge preservation. Of course, most of these examples are made in creative mode for time's sake, but they are mostly theoretically possible to make in survival mode given knowledge and time. But Minecraft is a survival game. I feel like survival is actually the most popular mode to play on, with some people even preferring hardcore mode. So part of the loop is collecting resources like food and defending yourself from hostiles. At the base level, you need to survive, but the goal is not survival. The goal is to create, or beat the Ender Dragon if that's the kind of player you are. Add mods on top of it, and you can have infinite, tangible goals to work toward. See, that's the key. Tangibility. To survive is a constant. In order to do anything else, you must still be alive to do it. If the goal is to be alive, you've pretty much completed the goal upon loading into the world for the first time. This concept is a huge reason why people will impose restrictions on themselves or set a certain goal to achieve. We've all seen the 100 days in Minecraft style videos where someone makes a world and plays that world for a set time frame. Because of the challenge they've set, once the surviving is out of the way on day 2, they have to do something else to fill the time. The survival mechanics become a backseat to the creativity and other gameplay. Also with hardcore mode being a challenge of how much can I do before I do something stupid and lose it all. The death is simply a challenge end state, and the minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour focus is exploring, planning, harvesting, and building. Even the majority of the threats that would come up, like enemy mobs, end up just being farmed for resources. The survival disappears. It becomes all about how much you can do. Subnautica works in much the opposite way. Building is actually quite limited, working with prefabs that can only be connected in a set number of ways. Now that's not to say creativity is not present or encouraged. I've seen some stunning creations in this game as well. Subnautica also has more in the way of survival elements, needing to think about water as well as food unless you play in the freedom mode. Subnautica has the draw of a cohesive narrative. The goal is, yes, to survive and to escape planet 4546b, but the story requires active participation from the player to be accomplished while working around the survival mechanics. Riley's survival and escape is important, but death is never canon. The survival is simply an obstacle, a gameplay mechanic, a challenge to be overcome, but the goal isn't just to live on 4546b, it's to get home. You can make arguments that the planet is Riley's new home and that going back to Alterra can be a quote bad ending or whatever, but that narrative is the driving force behind the game. It's the reason to go on. It's the reason to explore the Aurora. It's the reason to go deeper. It's the reason to actually give a shit about the character you're controlling and the world that you're playing in. Then Rust, a game which I've never played and have no real desire to, gets its staying power from the multiplayer aspect. From what I gather, people get into this game due to connections they make with other people, good or bad. The survival aspects drive a sort of real-world simulation, developing need, supply and demand, and scarcity, allowing for an almost simulated society that develops stories organically. Also, from what I've seen, the base building is pretty robust, and people can get really damn creative with their bases. In Rust, the goal is to survive, at least as far as I can tell, but the multiplayer aspect changes this into a narrative of trying to survive together, which I can understand the draw of. I just hear way too much about like rampant toxicity in the community to ever try to touch that with a 10-foot pole. The way I see it, a tangible goal is imperative for a survival game to be actually interesting. Take a look at Fallout Frost and Fallout Dust, which are hardcore survival conversion mods for Fallout 4 and New Vegas respectively. I played both of these, and while I never really finished either because they are hard games, if I were to go back and try to finish one of them, it would have to be Dust. Because Dust actually has a tangible goal. Dust sees you as a random person in the Mojave 20 years after the events of New Vegas. The Sierra Madre cloud has rolled in, the tunnelers have invaded, the strip is lost, and the entire wasteland now truly lives up to its namesake. Unlike the original game, anything and everything is hostile to you, even the original player character of the courier, if you happen to find them. Not this guy though, for some reason, poor fucker. The mod is best played on hardcore, so food, water, and rest are vital, but also even rarer than the base game. Dust plays out similar to Subnautica in a way, albeit with much harsher emphasis on survival itself. Unlike Subnautica's non-issue of staying alive with some rudimentary knowledge, Dust is brutal. Bro died to his own trap. Not only are food, water, and safe sleeping spots scarce, everything can kill you in 1 to 2 hits. It is a harrowing experience, but mostly because you do in fact have hope. Your main quest is to escape the Mojave. Now, diegetically, this disconnects slightly, as the main quest being escape tells the player that escaping is in fact possible, while the character would not really know that off the bat, but it gives you something to work toward. While you work your way to escaping, exploring the world for materials, supplies, or information, you'll stumble across mountains of intriguing locations, lore, and story beats. I won't go into depth on the progression, storyline, or endings, as I never really got that far, and also would rather not spoil anything for those curious. If you do like brutal survival experiences with good progression and really interesting lore, you should check out Dust. It's really good. Frost, on the other hand, was designed as a free-form survival experience for Fallout 4, as stated on the mod page. Set in the years directly after the Great War, while the world is still blanketed in a nuclear winter, you play as yet another random person in the wasteland just trying not to die. And that's where it loses me. Unlike Dust, there is no escape. There is no goal besides is surviving. Which of course makes sense. There is no escape. It's a global nuclear fucking winter. You don't win that. You cannot win that. Death comes for us all, and in an environment like this, it'll come for you quick. Which is why I just can't with this mod. There's no point. Yes, the world is full of the same level of lore, environmental storytelling, and all that like Dust, but there's no reason to seek it out. In Dust, you find a lot of stuff because you're searching for a way out, leaving no stone unturned and finding a lot of things unimportant to the character, but still interesting for the player. Survival games are, simply put, meant to simulate survival, but they cannot simulate real, genuine consequences for the failure to survive. If you die in any of these games, at best you have to load a save, and at worst you have to start over from scratch. But regardless of the outcome, you can try again, which leads to an inherent disconnect. In real life, the goal of surviving is actually quite imperative, as generally people don't want to die. But if you die in Minecraft, Subnautica, Rust, Frost, or Lone Survivor, so what? You lose some progress? You have to make a new world? Hell, depending on game modes, you might not even lose anything. Project Zomboid is a game about your death in a zombie apocalypse. Every time you start a run, it opens with, "This is how you die." It is inevitable. There is no win state. You don't get to extract or wipe out the zombies or find a cure. You survive, you fight, and eventually you die. It's bleak, intense, and despite the zombies, a very realistic depiction of how this sort of thing would shake out. It's a really great game with phenomenal mechanics and so much care put into it, but I just can't get into it because to me, what's the point? The goal is survival. But in my mind, all I have to do is turn the game off. I lose nothing by giving up and gain nothing by continuing. I will say me bouncing off this game is probably more than just that. While I respect and admire the mechanics on a, I guess, intellectual level, for lack of a better term, I kind of struggle to perform with the mechanics as is. And being unable to actually interact with the mechanics and be good at the game means I die very quickly. It does have a very Minecraft appeal to it, I think, in the creativity and how you set up your character. I think you can do a lot of base building, farming, stuff like that. I've never really gotten that far because I die really fast, but I've seen other people's playthroughs and it looks like that's kind of really the draw. There's also the multiplayer aspect. You play with friends or in a server or something, I'm sure it's a lot more interesting than playing in single player. But in single player, I feel like I'm fighting a constant losing battle, which of course is the point because it's the story of how you died and all that. But besides some virtual stuff, a character that you see from a distance in an isometric camera view, and some time, do you really lose anything by dying? Episode 3 of HBO's adaptation of The Last of Us expanded significantly on the backstory of Bill and Tommy while also changing the story slightly. We spend around an hour just following around this couple as they meet, survive, live, and die in this horrific apocalypse. But for them, it wasn't horrific. They carve out a beautiful, almost normal life amidst the end of the world. This episode lit the world on fire, I feel, and the internet was just losing it over the episode. They loved it so much. I did too. I feel like it's actually the best episode of the season. But the ending reveal is played as sad, or at least a lot of people interpreted it that way. But if you think about it, they won. They died peacefully in their sleep in a home they maintained, while so many other people are dying in just the worst ways imaginable. So why did many people, including me, get so emotional over their death? Honestly, this kind of goes into like a philosophical territory, like why do we live? What's the meaning of life? Or rather, like what's the point of living, especially when you know that it ends? These are questions that have plagued humanity since we began to think. I won't pretend that I have the definitive answer. In fact, I kind of have no fucking idea. But this episode subtextually dips into this heavily. At least a part of why we continue to live is happiness, contentment, a purpose, or loved ones. Meaning can be found elsewhere, but if you ask most anybody, they'll give you an answer that aligns with one of those four things. In this situation, if one of them dies, the audience loses something tangible, because then we would be able to see the other character grieve and be a human in that situation, something that we are not actively feeling. In a real life scenario, yeah, death is pretty tangible for the person doing the dying. But would the audience really give a shit if we just watched Bill piss around for 30 minutes and then die? I know I wouldn't. Maybe somebody would like that, but I would be pretty bored by that, I feel. And then it also wouldn't have been the best episode of the season. With a video game, the player is the audience. Sure, when you create a character, you get some level of connection, but most of these games have little to none in the way of genuine characterization. And at the end of the run, death is just part of the gameplay loop. You die, you reset or reload or respawn. You don't lose anything besides time. In my most successful run of Frost, which was years ago and I don't actually have footage for because it was years ago, I made it to Hangman's Alley with some schematics or something. Frost revamped the way that workshops work. You needed to find schematics for certain things. I do not remember it specifically. Anyway, I had enough materials as well as the schematics or whatever it was to make like a small water purifier, some power, and a turret. For all intents and purposes, due to how the game world of Fallout 4 works, I had essentially one right then and there. I had shelter, water, safety, and could literally grow as much food as I wanted because the laws of thermodynamics and conservation of mass are more like suggestions in video games. Since the goal was survive, that was it. I had survived. In a perfect simulation that could account for genuine human interaction and the flow of time, my next step would be to try to find like-minded survivors, or rather any survivors, and try to establish connections, friendships, and whatever, and try to rebuild some sort of society or something. This exists somewhat as Frost takes advantage of the settlement system to bring in NPCs, but from what I gather, it's just the standard settlers. They barely qualify as characters. You can build settlements, but they don't lead anywhere or do anything besides providing easier survival. So what's the point? I could explore, but why? I don't need anything from the ruins, and mostly what I'll find anyway is murder, death, or a note from a long dead NPC. If it was me actually there and not a video game character I was controlling, I would have the drive to explore and scavenge and try to not die. But if my character goes without food or water or dies, oh well, I can just reload a save and try something else. I guess this is where the inherent need to roleplay comes in, and I guess maybe I'm not very good at that with video games. For the same reason I'm constantly trying to guess twists or story elements while playing a story game. I can't disconnect from the fact that it's a work of fiction and it's not actually going to physically affect me in any way. It's also a risk-reward thing in my mind. Games like Zomboid and Frost are just fucking hard. Frost for having a brutal resource drain and also an incredibly fast time to kill for the player and enemies, along with Fallout 4 survival mode's mechanic of needing to rest to save. Now, as far as installing Frost in the modern day and not back when it was popular, the current recommended install process involves adding a mod that lets you quick save like normal, which is nice. Zomboid is then hard due to RNG factors of combat, lootings, the spawn area, and zombie placement, along with the really large aggro ranges, tough-ass enemies, crazy resource drain, and incredibly complex mechanics to boot. Venturing out of your safe zone in either of these games is a profound risk with high likelihood of no rewards, shitty rewards, or death. Even the best case scenario is often just an upgrade or item or something similar that just allows you to play the game longer. For some, even a lot of people, that's enough. Playing the game is its own reward. But for me, I can't work with it. I've stated often now that I look for games that are objective oriented. I can deal with brutal, even unfair difficulty if I feel the reward is worth it. I may get frustrated or even angry, but if the objective is good enough, I will persist. Take a look again at Subnautica. That game also has high risk factors in certain areas. Heading to the Aurora brings you head to head with your first Reaper Leviathan, which is a genuinely famous staple of the game and a terrifying foe that can and will destroy your Seamoth and kill you in the process. But narratively, you have a good, concrete reason to brave the monster and push past, what with the whole radiation leak and everything. Then once you're on the Aurora, you're rewarded with many new technology blueprints that you would not get otherwise. Well, okay, you can get the other ones in some other areas, but those areas that you can get them in besides the Aurora are generally much more dangerous than braving one Reaper Leviathan. When I finally managed to snag a download for Lone Survivor and gave it a shot, I felt the risk-reward slider jump heavily in the favor of high risk for little reward. Once the lights go out, any employees nearby will swarm and do their best to kill you. They can quickly break objects too, so barricading is next to useless, and trying to put furniture up in a barricade is frustrating anyway. The best thing to do in order to not die is to beeline for a cafeteria on day one, stock up on food, then climb onto a high shelf during nighttime and camp. There's no reason to try to combat the employees. The keys that you need are found randomly around the world. I found 2 on my first day during an attempt. If you die, that's a run over, unless you remember to save recently. And at most you get like a power up or XP from killing employees. Nothing else changes at nighttime. Now this could just be a side effect of a pre-alpha game. These bookshelves should be just as movable and destructible as the other objects, and sitting on top of them is kind of a cheese. But without a reason to try to explore and lack of real barricading mechanics, the only thing to do for 10 real life minutes of lights out is to not die. And like, that's not fun. Maybe it is for somebody, but it's not for me. The only real draw to this game is the association with the SCP, I feel. I'd argue 80 to 90% of people who would click on one of these in the Steam store are people who are big SCP fans. People who have read the entry of 3008 and maybe thought about what they would do in that situation. Now, stay with me a moment while I paint a picture. The conceit of these games is that you're a person who ended up within SCP-3008. And as anyone in that scenario would want to do, your goal is to escape. So you do that. You spend hours scavenging, building defenses, and warding off justifiably angry retail workers. In the case of Lone Survivor, you happen upon a key that can be used on the exit that randomly generates. You look into an exit spawn and bam, you're out. Now what? You won. That's the game. You gonna tell your friends about it? Is there some deep lore that hasn't already been discussed ad nauseum by the SCP community that was added by the game? Was it at all unique besides just being based around something that you already liked? My point is that there needs to be something more besides the backdrop of the infinite IKEA, which, let me get this straight, I think the concept's really cool. It's kind of the main reason why I started this whole video. About 8 minutes into Wicked Wizard's video, while he's still talking about Lone Survivor, I had a thought that was like, dude, this game concept would kick absolute ass in a Boneworks style VR engine. If you're in an IKEA and you're not like a gun carrier or whatever, in a situation like in Lone Survivor, you're not really gonna have weaponry, so it's gonna be scarce. Like, there's probably kitchenwares and knives and shit. Can you tell I've never been inside an IKEA? I don't know what goes on there. Those places are mysteries to me. Anyway, most of the time, you're gonna be using improvised or crafted weapons. Broken table legs or chairs or whatever. On a standard flat game, that is a rough starter. Even games that pioneer and champion physics-based interactions have limitations. Setting up inventories and object interaction and animations for first or, God forbid, third-person mechanics while trying to take into account the sheer possibilities of improvised weaponry just makes my head hurt just thinking about it, dude. If you're not familiar with Boneworks and have ever had a passing interest in VR, I highly recommend looking it up. It's not the most polished, interesting, or necessarily fun VR game on the market, especially now, but its level of interaction is off the fucking chain. Anything that isn't nailed down and isn't too heavy can be picked up and manipulated. Melee attacks do damage based on how hard you hit and where. Many objects are straight up destructible. Everything is climbable if you know what you're doing. Gravity is a tool and a weapon. And not to mention the stellar firearm physics. God, I could do a whole video on how much I love the gunplay in Boneworks, but that's not this video. It is genuinely my favorite VR game and has set the bar for what I expect when I boot one up. So far, none have really compared, except like Bone Lab, but that's a direct sequel, so it doesn't really count. Of course, it feels the same or even better. Anyway, you take the entire concept and first off, put it in VR. This does add a layer to development, as virtual reality games are around an order of magnitude more difficult to develop than a standard flat game, but I feel it would be worth it. Simply being there removes a lot of the potential disconnect between the player character and the player themselves. It's not just some person on a screen being attacked by overworked, underpaid, and understaffed monsters, it's actually you. Physically. Then you take the blanket fort-esque base building mechanics and make them physics-based with some sort of anchoring system, so you have to plan out and physically build your bases. That adds to a sense of accomplishment. You make it with your bare hands or controllers, and you're more likely to defend it or rely on it. And that's all well and good, but I still don't think that is enough. There needs to be a bigger reason to exist in this game world besides survival or escape. Because again, if you want to escape, if that's all you want, all you have to do is turn off the game. I want to point back again at Boneworks. The biggest criticisms that game got were that its story sucked and it was a glorified tech demo. In a way, yeah, but also it did have a defined story and goal. You play as Arthur Ford, who hacked into MythOS in an attempt to access the Voidway and achieve functional immortality. The progress of the game takes you toward that goal, Arthur's goal, one that can't be achieved by shutting down the game. During my work on this video, I discovered a tiny indie game called Storebound with a demo that just released a couple weeks ago. It's also inspired by SCP-3008, but only inspired. Instead of an IKEA or IKEA parody, it's a fully fully unique world with a fully unique store, following more of a mall layout rather than a super department store. It's an incredibly charming game so far, with creative creatures, an interesting art style, and actual gameplay, besides don't die and maybe you can escape. There's exploration and scavenging to be done, but it feels more like Dust than Frost in that sense. It's leading you somewhere, with an environmental narrative that I assume will be expanded upon in the full game. The mechanics are really sound for a survival horror game. Keep quiet and out of sight to avoid monsters, and hide away in vents and behind walls, but you can't stay in the dark too long or you'll lose sanity. There's also genuinely puzzles and a horror game. Who would have thought? My friends and I played through the entire demo and it was really good. Definitely some tweaks need to be made with balancing and polish, but overall I was impressed. It is exactly what this idea needs to take into account to actually be unique and interesting. Sure, it's not the sandbox horror style that these games keep trying to go in, but it really does work and could scratch the itch of the Infinite IKEA game if you have one. Please, please, please check out this demo. I have no association with this team, obviously, but after playing the demo, I tried to see if anyone else has heard of it, and like nobody is aware that this thing even exists. It could be a great co-op horror game that isn't based around finding junk for money. It really is best played with friends, but it's also a fun little hour-long experience regardless. I just really love demos. I'm super happy that they're coming back in a style with things like the Steam Next Fest and all that. It's really just the best way to showcase a game. But Storebound, I think, is proof that this Infinite IKEA game can in fact work. It just needs a little bit more than, here's the game, don't die. The concept and the gameplay can only take you so far. There needs to be a reason. Taking it back to all the other games that I've talked about, even the ones I bounced off of, they all have some reason to keep playing after the initial survival section is solved. Whether that be a story, a creative endeavor, or a social function, once survival is achieved, there's a reason to live. And that's all I have for you today. It's a little bit of a different video than I usually do, as I talked more about a topic rather than a specific game, but I had fun making it and I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you did enjoy it, I would recommend you subscribe and support the channel. As a reminder, I don't just make videos, I also stream here and on Twitch Monday through Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. As of this video's release, I have finally started playing Deltarune and I am loving the hell out of that game, so come in and have some fun with me. Either way, thank you for watching and have a good night.